Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press joins us. Wiebe, perfect day. I know you sometimes are difficult to pin down, but this Thursday visit today worked out quite well with the big news.
Yeah, got some big news today while we were wandering around the property here today with finally some resolution. Huss, we had been waiting for resolution on this matter, and looks like a trade that I think both sides will be quite happy with, but definitely going to be something that I think from the scouts that I've spoken to today, Jets fans are going to be pretty happy with the return. Obviously, we've talked about the layers of this issue for a long time, Huss. Tough for draft and development team to miss out on a player without even playing a single game in the organization when he was drafted 2 years ago. But at the same time, they're getting a player who is going to be helping them in the long run here, Huss. And, I know some people were hoping for a little bit more of an immediate spark in terms of, help right now. Brayden Yager is a guy who has a great shot. He scored a lot of points in the Western Hockey League so far. He's 19 years old, so he's in the Colby Barlow situation. For those who don't know, that means NHL or junior for him. No Manitoba Moose option, at least not out of the gate until their respective seasons are over. This is a guy who is going to probably play a massive role and wear a letter for Team Canada at the World Junior coming up. And hey, now it's up to him. If he can, I wouldn't be shocked if he got into a game or two, but again, I think it's most likely that he'll be headed back to junior before that 9 games are up in terms of maybe a potential early run. But again, this is a great long-term play for the Winnipeg Jets. Skilled player, rocket shot, very dependable two-way player. Again, Huss, you see a guy who has 95 points, you think he's just an offensive wizard. From the people that I spoke to, this is a guy that, even if he's not scoring, he's a really good contributor in terms of his ability to. He's a guy who killed penalties at 17 and 18 years old at the Western Hockey League level. Very good defensively, and probably a little bit better skater at this stage of his career than Rutger McGroarty, and high character kid, and really good vision and hockey sense as well. So for the folks who don't know much about the Moose Jaw Warriors right shot center, I think they're going to come to like him pretty quickly here. And he's the kind of guy who's going to turn some heads at training camp, much like Brad Lambert did at his first Jets camp for me. Kenny,
it is... I mean, I've been saying all along that if the Jets... I'd hope that maybe this would work out. I mean, and Naz in the chat was mentioning, this trade doesn't make Rutger less of a prospect. I mean, he's still the same guy that he was the last couple of years when we were all looking forward to him signing and hopefully being a big part of the team moving forward. But you have to play the card that you're dealt with. And, for whatever reason, people got in, the advisors around, and all of a sudden, they weren't going to get the automatic spot in and went elsewhere. And that obviously turned some people off. But for the Jets to make this trade, and I'm sort of with you. I mean, we were doing a meeting this morning today when this news broke.
Yeah.
We immediately go to look at Pittsburgh's thing, and I'm like looking at their roster. I'm like, there's not a single player on this team that I think could possibly be in this trade that would look like, oh, that would be great. And then it was like, obviously, this is Brayden Yager. And then you look, 14th overall pick, Rutger in 22, 14th overall pick, Brayden Yager in 2023. We had Grant McKegg on, and he called the Jets taking Yager last year in the draft. Well, He wasn't there. He went 5 spots ahead of Barlow. They basically get a prospect from that similar thing with a high-end upside at the center position and 1 year younger. It might be a little bit more of a weight, I guess, but Cheveldayoff did seem to kind of tick off the boxes. Talented young player with high upside, under team control, has just signed his ELC. And listen, the elephant in the room about all this is that this is the first time in a long time the Jets have had a top elite prospect coming out of the Western Hockey League in Western Canada.
Yeah, a guy from the prairies, that wasn't a prerequisite, but I certainly think that it helps in this situation and scenario. Huss,
hasn't gone over poorly in the WST chat today.
No, I'm guessing that it is certainly welcome news. We've talked a lot about the Jets not drafting by passport, but when the players are relatively equal and you have an opportunity to add someone who's from Western Canada, that's going to be an obvious bonus. And as you mentioned, Huss, the impediment of not signing is not there. He's already signed. So Yager would be a guy who I think would be pretty excited about the opportunity to play in the prairies. And again, for the flip side of this, for folks who haven't seen yet, Rutger has signed his ELC with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we would imagine that means he's going to be in the NHL this year. But Huss, I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time with the Jets going into their extensions with Hellebuck and Scheifele and having to make a decision on Nikolai Ehlers this summer and potentially Kyle Connor as early as next summer or after January 1st. Having Brayden Yager available on an ELC is going to be helpful, whether that's one season down the road or 1.5 or whatever it ends up being. This is a player who, we've been talking for months since Scott Arniel took over, and all the comparisons to the Dallas Stars were being made about Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven entering the lineup. I mean, Brayden Yager will be that player for the Winnipeg Jets, whether it's, in 8 months from now, or, a year from now, or a year and a half, or whatever it ends up taking. And as mentioned, I mean, if this guy comes in and has a camp like Wyatt Johnston had, who knows? He could. There's opportunity there, as we've been talking about. I just think that in terms of expectations, it's most likely he'll be going back to the Western Hockey League, just given the additional maturation process that probably has to occur with most 19-year-olds. So this is a guy who's a high-end prospect, really well liked in the scouting world. And you're right, Huss. I mean, when Elliott's tweet went out this morning, Mike McIntyre and I were starting to work, who's in this deal? Like maybe Owen Pickering on defense, the Manitoban, but then we thought, well, I thought that Yager would be almost in that untouchable category. I know he's 14th overall, but it seemed like they were pretty high on him given how well he played for the Western Hockey League championship winning Moose Jaw Warriors this year. But obviously it's interesting, Huss, right? So the Penguins are getting the player with a little bit more size. We know what Rutger's attributes are. Potential power forward. Yager, a little bit more of a skilled player with a well-rounded two-way game. Not as physical at 6 foot, 175 or so, but really dependable. From one of the scouts I talked with, he's not an overly physical guy, but he's not shy. He's so smart. He thinks like Cole Perfetti, kind of in that kind of way. Checks with his feet and anticipation, but this is a guy that a lot of tucks us. I mean, 35 snipes, 95 points in 57 games last year, and then added another, I think, 27 points in 20 playoff games, helping the Warriors win the title. So he's got high-end skill, but he's not a one-trick pony, I guess. So I think this is a really smart addition by the Winnipeg Jets. And again, we've talked about this other factor a lot, Huss. Right shot centerman. The Jet outside of Brad Lambert and Mark Scheifele, Jets don't have a lot of right shot centermen in the organization. And yes, he could play on the wing if he has to as well. If they end up going that route, that's the position he played with the World Junior team basically last year. But I like the move on a number of levels. And as far as McGroarty goes, Huss, I mean, King of Kensington last summer, right? I mean, in last July, he was the toast of the town, and for whatever reason, and I'll be curious to see if any of those reasons get trickled out by either side. And I doubt the Jets are going to say anything. And I'm guessing Rutger also was just going to say that I wanted a direct path to the NHL. And even if he bothers to say that, I mean, but that's what we've uncovered over the last couple of months here. And the Penguins are a team that needs players on ELCs. They got a lot of high-priced, high-salaried players. So this is a good fit for Rutger as well. For Pittsburgh too. I mean, like, listen, you've like Malkin's 38.
Yeah.
Sid, I think, is 37.
7. Yep.
So, like, I know they were super high on Brayden Yager. I mean, Dubas said as much. They signed him. I mean, he was a huge part of their future going forward. But I mean, if they're going to give another crack to these guys to, be a playoff team, like that extra year of having a guy ready to go in and play right now, I think makes a difference. Here's what Dubas had to say. This is a quote from the Penguins general manager. "We had a difficult decision to make with this trade because we hold Brayden Yager in such a high regard as a person and prospect. After much consideration, we decided that the opportunity to add Rutger McGroarty was ultimately in the best interest of the Penguins. He possesses the combination of ability, leadership, and competitiveness that the Penguins need to achieve our goals in the short and long run. We look forward to welcoming Rutger and his family to the city of Pittsburgh and the Penguins. We look forward to welcoming Rutger, his family, and the 25 family advisors to the city of, it is funny how this all went down. And, Ken, from my perspective, you mentioned about, Rutger, when he was here before, he made such an incredible impression on everyone. Yeah. Like, the Jets won't be doing a tribute video, but I think we're going to do our own tribute video of just the highlights of his interviews, like glossing Winnipeg. And
Listen, it might have all just been performative bullshit, or it may have been completely sincere. And then because of what is happening around him after a couple years in Michigan and many of his contemporaries and teammates going to teams where they were walking just right in the lineup, enough people got in his ear, the people that are making decisions for him, and sent things a different way. Like, he still does have all of that. He does project to be a guy that could be a captain one day. There is still question about his foot speed at the NHL level, which is not the case with Yager. But this doesn't diminish Rutger McGroarty as a prospect, but I think it also speaks to Kevin Cheveldayoff not willing to settle, as we've seen so many times before, for 4 quarters on the dollar or 90 cents for a dollar. He wanted a prospect of equal or better value in theirs, and then the intangibles can take care of themselves. But this is obvious. I'm sure this was talked about at the draft. We'd heard Pittsburgh being rumored and interested in McGroarty before. It was time to figure this out, whether this was going to happen this year and you were going to make it happen and he was going to sign, or they're taking it over from there. We're also hearing that Cheveldayoff's media availability is going to be at 3 o'clock. We'll try to bring that to you live here on the program as we continue and sort of finish up the show.
Yeah, Hassan, and we've been talking about this for a couple of months. Like, one of the difficult factors in all of this is that it was going to be hard to, discern equal value, right? Because as you've mentioned before, and we've talked about, because Rutger is 2 years into the development path, the Jets don't really they didn't want to just trade for the 14th overall pick or something of relative value.
Exactly.
Because Rutger's already been developed for 2 seasons. Even though he didn't play for the organization, he was developed for the organization and, in some ways by the organization in terms of development camps and things of that nature. And, all the countless visits with Jimmy Roy and Mike Keane and on the player development side. So Yager is an interesting study because, yes, he is younger, but he also projects to have a pretty high ceiling there. But, yeah, I mean, McGroarty, hey, this is simple, Huss. I mean, we've talked about it for a long time. I would have preferred McGroarty to just, again, if he didn't like the fact he wasn't guaranteed a spot, well, just go win the spot. It seems pretty simple. But, for him, he's going to a spot that makes sense for him. And for the Penguins, it makes sense because they're getting the type of player that is a big body. Like, they got a lot of skill in their lineup, but they don't have a lot of guys of his stature on an ELC contract. So it makes sense for them as well, for sure. Again, we've talked about the Penguins dating back to last deadline, Huss, right? When, you talked about it with Hammer, and we've talked about it as well. So it's not a surprise that there was interest in McGroarty. There was always interest, but as we've talked about, Kevin Cheveldayoff just wasn't going to, say, here, yeah, by the way, you can have our prospect for basically nothing. No, that's just not the way that he operates. So, but at the same time, he put on a brave face and he dug in his heels and said, hey, this has got to work for both sides. And I think he found a way that he made it work for the Jets, both in the short term and the long term, because we know McGroarty had decided to go back. Now he's changed his mind. I think it's interesting, Huss. I mean, I don't know if it's buyer's remorse, but that sort of idea, right? You're sitting around and thinking, oh, well, maybe Frank will come back, or Nazar, and then maybe the other guys will come back. But then they ended up signing, I guess. So all of a sudden, Rutger was looking around, and the seats at the table were all empty at Michigan. So now he's going to have a chance to go and sign his contract, get your bonus, play in the NHL, and now it's up to Rutger. Rutger was very open, knowing that his skating needs improvement, but before he's going to be an impact player. But he's also going to a spot where there's going to be opportunities available for him, much like there would have been for him in Winnipeg. So, this reminds me, it's not a parallel situation, but, much like we've gone back to 2011, there was always the Scheifele-Couturier comparison. Now we're going to be looking at the Yager and McGroarty situation. They're going to be tied together, sort of like Dubois and Laine in some ways, right? So it's interesting, but I think both players will probably go on and do well. But now it's up to them to show what they've got, and time will tell what this move was. But I mean, looking at all the information available that we have so far, based on some of the other names we had been hearing about us previously in terms of interest, I mean, getting a top 15 player is a pretty good return for Kevin Cheveldayoff, given the as you mentioned, I mean, this is another classic example. I think I just wrote it in my column here. Classic turning a lemon into lemonade here, it seems like, right? So similar to last summer with the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation. So again, no one is pretending that this is optimal for the Winnipeg Jets in having to move McGroarty, but if you had to move McGroarty, then they've done pretty well for themselves, and now it's up to the players to sort out the rest of it.
Yeah, listen, I mean, as far as the whole going back to Michigan thing, I think we can all see right now that wasn't his plan, and that was part of an orchestrated operation by him, the people around him, the family, whoever was all involved, to either force the Winnipeg Jets to trade him or to give them the assurances that he's walking right into the NHL. I will say this, Pittsburgh is a top-heavy team with a lot of openings elsewhere on the roster. Now, where he plays, I mean, that'll be up to Mike Sullivan to figure out. But there's certainly an easier path for him to get into the lineup. But for these guys to speak so highly about Michigan and everything like that, he sure played them pretty good, because they're probably a few weeks away from probably starting school right now.
Captain skates will be happening, yeah.
Yeah. He's probably saying, "Oh, actually, I got what I wanted, guys. Have a great season.
Peace.
Thank you."
And that's a big loss for Michigan. Let's not kid ourselves. This is a Hobey Baker candidate. So if you're the head coach of Michigan, you're probably not thrilled. Yes. And unless you were kept in the loop, Huss, you're probably not thrilled. That's for sure.